Hello everyone. Today I am going to discuss a famous novel, namely Murder of Roger Ackroyd, written by Agatha Christie. This novel is a famous detective novel. When Agatha Christie reached her literary prominence, then the tradition of writing detective fiction, crime fiction, was very popular. Naturally, Agatha Christie was tempted to write this type of novel. Before starting the novel, let's see the dedication of the novel. Agatha writes in a dedication to Punky, who likes an orthodox detective story, murder, inquest and suspicion falling on everyone in turn. Now, who is Punky? Punky is the nickname of Agatha's sister, Margaret Frary Waltz. Significantly enough, the novel has been dedicated to her own sister, and there is a story behind this dedication. One day, the two sisters were discussing the recently published comic detective story, namely The Mystery of the Yellow Room, written by Gaston Leroux. While discussing this novel, Christie wished to write such a story, but her sister challenged her that she would not be able to write such a story. So Agatha becomes obstinate. She takes the challenge and writes the novel. So she dedicates the novel to her own sister. This novel is published in 1926. As it is detective novel, we must say something regarding the salient features of a detective novel. What is it? Number one feature is there must be a murder or any kind of crime which will put everyone related in the novel unsettled, uneasy. In this novel, we will see the murder of a wealthy man, namely Roger Ackroyd. The second feature of the detective novel is the theme of concealment. Each and everyone related in this novel will hide something. Naturally, the solution to the case, to the problem, will not be easy. The detective must shed much sweat in discovering the criminal because of that theme of concealment. The third feature of a detective novel is there must be a renowned detective who will minutely investigate the case and very magically expose everyone every criminal related to the case. At the end of the novel, we will see that all the problems have been solved and the main culprit will be detected. This happens in the novel. The fourth feature of a detective novel is its suspension. The suspension will be set up in the very beginning of the novel. The suspension will be continued, and at the end of the novel the suspension will be out. All these features are available in this novel. Naturally, we can consider this novel to be a genuine detective novel. Now, I must say something regarding the characters involved in the novel. So, first and foremost character is Dr. James Shepherd. His title says that he is a doctor, famous doctor. He treats the people in illness. Now, he is the inhabitant of the town of King's Abbot, better to say village, namely King's Abbot. He serves as a companion crematorium to Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective who will eventually crack the very complicated case. Although Shepherd appears to be a genial, straightforward character, his complicity in the mystery will prove one of the great plot twists of all time. Ultimately, Dr. Shepherd is revealed to be a shrewd, duplicitous and detached villain. Surprisingly enough, he is the narrator of the story and he is the villain. He is the murderer of Ackroyd. From the very beginning of the novel, we see that Dr. Shepherd very diplomatically misleads the detection, misleads the investigation, so that neither the detective nor anybody else can suspect him. Being a driver of the plot, he tries to misdirect the investigation, but to the world champion detective Mr. Hercule Poirot, he is revealed. At the end of the novel, we will see that he confesses everything and writes a big passage confessing his crime, and we are informed that he is going to commit suicide by eating veronal, one kind of poison, and ends the novel. Next character is Caroline Shepherd. She is old spinster sister of Mr. James Shepherd. She is very shrewd lady. She is very informant. She knows everything beforehand. In the novel, we will see that she supports Flora Ackroyd. She helps Mr. Hercule Poirot to direct the case, the investigation in proper way. She very often makes her brother uneasy by interrogating questions. Finally, we will see that Caroline Shepherd helps much in forwarding the plot. Agatha Christie later admitted that Caroline served as a model for her famous Miss Marple character, the spinster detective who pokes her nose in everyone else's business. Caroline Shepherd thus plays a significant role in the novel. Better to say, she is the foil character in the novel. Her brother tries to cover up everything, but she tries to expose everything. This is how the sister plays the role of foil. Next character is Hercule Poirot. Hercule Poirot was a famous detective, private detective in London. He was very renowned persona. He solved many mysterious cases, and now he has retired from his post and he has come to a village where Mr. Roger Ackroyd lives. But Mr. Hercule Poirot here lives in a seclusion by growing vegetables, hiding his own identity. He had spread the news that he was a hairdresser, and at present he is growing vegetables. But we are informed that he is not so. Ultimately, when Flora Ackroyd approaches him and requests him to take the case of the murder of Roger Ackroyd. Roger Ackroyd was his friend. Naturally, he takes the case then and there, and he is very aggressive to expose the villain, expose the murderer. So he takes the case and does the duty of detective very dexterously, very interestingly. He listens everything, interrogates everyone. He seems to be directed by Mr. James Shepherd while investigating, but underneath he weaves his own plan. And in the novel we have seen that magically enough he has detected Mr. James Shepherd to be the main villain, main culprit. We are pleased to see his intuition. We are pleased to see his introspection in detecting each and every one related in the novel. He does not punish the virtuous. He actually punishes the vicious. Here we must give credit to Mr. Hercule Poirot, and he has done a magic here. Next character is Mrs. Ferrars. Who is Mrs. Ferrars? When the novel starts, we will see that Mrs. Ferrars has committed suicide. In fact, he does not play any role in the novel, but she is referred time and again. Her story comes to us time and again. She is a character in spite of being physically absent. Mrs. Ferrars is supposed to poison her husband, Mr. Ferrars, and after 1 year she commits suicide by taking Verona. Everybody in the locality supposes that she kills herself because she felt guilty. It may be, but another incident related to her life comes to us. Someone was blackmailing her. Because of that blackmailing, she commits suicide. The issue of blackmailing continues to the very end of the novel. And again, we will see that she was being blackmailed by Mr. James Shepherd. So, James Shepherd is all-sided villain. This Mrs. Ferrars is a fiancée to Mr. Roger Ackroyd. Roger Ackroyd married a lady, Patton, but the lady killed herself by drinking after 4 years of their marriage. But already she had given a birth to a baby. So, at present, Mrs. Ferrars is a widow and Roger Ackroyd is a widower. Naturally, they come together, their affairs starts. They were going to marry, but before the completion, she committed suicide. This gives much shock to Mr. Roger Ackroyd. In the very beginning of the novel, we see that Mr. Roger Ackroyd was very anxious, was in very tension. He was morose because of the death of his beloved. Actually, he did not want to marry. He planned not to marry, but he got the golden opportunity and he agreed to marry Mrs. Ferrars, but that was not fulfilled. Next character, better to say most prominent character, is Roger Ackroyd, for whom the novel comes into existence. Mr. Roger Ackroyd is at present a widower. He is a central figure in King's Abode. He is a wealthy businessman. He influences as well as intrigues against his stepson, Ralph Patton. I have already told you, Ralph Patton is Ackroyd's son, but not his own son. Ralph Patton was actually a boy of his wife with another man. So, Roger Ackroyd and Mrs. Patton had no son. Ralph Patton actually comes from Mrs. Patton. Still, Mr. Roger Ackroyd loves him as a son and promises to give him everything, but the boy is very squandermania. So naturally, there was a problem in between father and stepson. When Mr. Roger Ackroyd is in tension, is in morose, he confesses everything to Mr. James Shepherd, and he mistakenly says that obviously Mrs. Ferrars has given him a letter confessing or exposing the name of the blackmailer, and the letter was sure to come that evening. So Mr. Shepherd is invited in the dinner party, and the letter comes, and he was about to read the letter. He had started to read the letter, but before mentioning the name of the blackmailer, he stops. It increases the suspicion of Mr. James Shepherd, and he jumps to the conclusion that to cover up his crime, he has to kill Mr. Roger Ackroyd, who is his best friend. So, the murder of Roger Ackroyd occurs. Next character is Ralph Patton. I have already told you that Ralph Patton is the son of Mrs. Patton by another man, not by Mr. Roger Ackroyd. Ralph Patton, due to the bad blood relationship with his adopted father, stepfather, he cannot recently stay with him. He stays in another place. He has many negative sides. He is a very vile character, spoils money, drinks. He has many bad habits. But he cannot be the murderer. He loves Flora Ackroyd and wants to marry for the purpose of having or appropriating the property of Mr. Roger Ackroyd. Flora Ackroyd is Roger Ackroyd's niece. Naturally, after his expiry, the lion's share of the property of Mr. Roger Ackroyd will go to Miss Flora Ackroyd. Naturally, if Ralph Patton can marry her, the property will be appropriated by him. But behind this scene, he has already secretly married Ursula Bird, another lady in the novel. But before the marriage, everything is cleared. As Mr. Patton was going to marry Flora Ackroyd, Flora Ackroyd is sanguine that Mr. Ralph Patton cannot be the murderer. So she is aggressive to give the investigation to a genuine person who will prove that Mr. Ralph Patton is not the murderer. So, Ralph Patton is a man on whose suspicion continues. Even everybody in the novel starts to believe that Mr. Ralph Patton has murdered his stepfather for the property. Even their recent relationship was not good at all. Next character is Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd. She is the wife of Mr. Roger Ackroyd's brother, who is at present dead. After the expiry of Roger Ackroyd's brother, both Cecil Ackroyd and her daughter Flora Ackroyd comes to Roger Ackroyd and they start to live there. And they, specifically Mrs. Cecil Ackroyd, does not have any interest in the novel. Even he is not in much tension regarding the murder of Roger Ackroyd. Her tension is related to Flora Ackroyd's property. She is interested in the will made by Mr. Roger Ackroyd. She complains to Major Blunt that her uncle, Mr. Roger Ackroyd has not given much thing to Flora Ackroyd. She is also aggressive to marry off Flora Ackroyd with Ralph Patton for the sake of that property. Now, another character is Flora Ackroyd, very significant character. If Flora Ackroyd would not be here, then the case would not go to Mr. Hercule Poirot. It could not get momentum. It could not be solved. Mr. James Shepard would not be detected. The mystery of Roger Ackroyd's murder would be in darkness. So, in this sense, Flora Ackroyd is very significant character in the novel. Now, Flora Ackroyd is sorry for the demise of her beloved uncle. She was fond of her uncle. But another reason is that she wants to save Mr. Ralph Patton. So she takes the case to Mr. Hercule Poirot. From the very beginning, he has been coming to say that Ralph Patton cannot be the murderer. Somebody else may be murderer. The truth must come to daylight. The truth must come to the daylight. So naturally, she plays the most vital role. She was going to marry Mr. Ralph Patton. But when she comes to know that Ralph Patton is already married to Ursula Byrne, she does not proceed. Naturally, her marriage is not materialized in the novel. Next character is Geoffrey Raymond. Geoffrey Raymond is a charming secretary to Mr. Roger Ackroyd. She is buoyant. He is buoyant and debonair, maintaining a relaxed attitude throughout the investigation. Although Ackroyd's death upset him, he is nonetheless led back and confident throughout the novel. He admits to being in a bit of debt, which the money he got from Ackroyd's will takes care of, but insists that he has an alibi for the time of the murder and thus should not be considered a suspect. Geoffrey Raymond, though related to Roger Ackroyd closely, he is not properly suspected. Still, he is interrogated time and again by Mr. Hercule Poirot. Next character is Major Blunt. Major Blunt is a big game hunter. He is not properly suspected by Mr. Hercule Poirot. Still, he is in the family. Naturally, he is also interrogated. He secretly loves Flora Ackroyd. But being reserved, he could not forward the love affair. Ultimately, he does not want to love Flora Ackroyd, so naturally the relationship is spoiled. Next character is Miss Russell, very significant caretaker, housekeeper of Mr. Roger Ackroyd. Mrs. Russell was in the family for long days. There was a rumor that whenever came to work in Major Ackroyd's family, household, the females, housekeepers, workers in the household are suspected to have the relationship with Mr. Ackroyd. Everybody had come and gone, but Russell stayed for long days. So everybody of that locality started to gossip that there is a close relationship between Miss Russell and Roger Ackroyd. They may be married. There may be close relationship. There may be a marital relationship in between them. But just before the murder of Mr. Roger Ackroyd, Russell is sorry and she leaves the household. Number one reason is that Mr. Roger Ackroyd had recently fallen into love with Mrs. Ferrars. So with her, the relationship cannot go on. And the second reason is that Cecil Ackroyd and Flora Ackroyd have come to the household and she feels disturbance. So without seeing the future, she leaves the house. Miss Russell has also hidden something. She had an illegitimate son. In the novel we will see that in the evening of Roger's murder, a stranger came to the main gate of King's Abode. In the end of the novel we will see that that man was actually Russell's son, namely Charles Kent. Later, Charles Kent is also suspected. Next character is John Parker. From the very beginning of the novel, we see that Parker is top suspect. He is the butler of Ackroyd, and the news spreads that Mr. James Shepard was informed of Roger Ackroyd's murder by John Parker. He had phoned Mr. James Shepard, but actually it did not happen. Parker is a professional, competent servant. Poirot suspects there is something corrupt about him and eventually discovers that Parker blackmailed his former employer and was snooping around for the means to blackmail Ackroyd as well. Although Parker is greedy, Poirot nevertheless deems him too cowardly to be Ackroyd's murderer. James Shepard does everything to put suspicion on Mr. Parker, but Parker admits that he did not phone Mr. James Shepard. Though he is time and again interrogated, he is scot-free. He is scot-free. He proves to be without any guilt. Next character is Ursula Byrne. Born a lady but forced to make her own living when her parents could not provide for her, Ursula decided to become a parlour maid. Ursula was a parlour maid in the household of Roger Ackroyd. Although it represented a step down in class, she had to stoop below her class, yet she did the job of parlour maid. It allowed her to support herself. She knew she was a competent maid after falling in love with Ralph Patton. I have already told you that there was a marital relationship between Ralph Patton and Ursula Byrne. And this lady secretly marrying him. Ursula was furious when he announced his engagement to Flora and is distraught when he disappears after his uncle's murder. Another incident will come to us, that in the evening of the murder of Roger Ackroyd, Ralph Patton was seen in the village with a lady. It was a great suspicion, great rumor. Who can be the lady? The people thought that the lady can be Flora Ackroyd, but it was not she. Then this lady, Ursula Byrne, came to the village to bicker, to quarrel with Mr. Ralph Patton for his remarriage. Next character is Charles Kent. Mrs. Ackroyd's disowns her. Kane shows sign of having been a strong, capable, smart man, but an addiction to alcohol and heroin. He caused him to become a seedy, paranoid criminal. Although Miss Russell wants to believe he can recover him from his addiction, he does not show any sign of being motivated to cure himself. He does not, however, reveal his mother's identity when questioned by the police, helping to preserve her reputation in town. So, the stranger mentioned in the novel is none other than Charles Kent himself. Next character is Inspector Regler. In a detective novel, another salient feature is there. The police inspector, the policeman will be there, and there will be a detective. The approach of the policeman towards the path of investigation and the approach of the detective towards the path of investigation differ greatly. The Inspector Regler takes the case initially. He interrogates some of the people under suspicion, but he grazes over the surface. Naturally, he could not find out the solution. He was guided by Mr. James Ackroyd greatly. Naturally, he was suspecting Ralph Patton. So, he is good for nothing in the novel. Next character is Inspector Davis. Inspector Davis is also a local police officer. Davis is the first on the scene when Ackroyd is found murdered. He is self-important, blundering and obsessed with physical clues that will ultimately not prove to be useful to solving the murder. His initial incompetence only serves to demonstrate the brilliance of product. We can consider Inspector Regler and Inspector Davis together. They are both good for nothing in the investigation. Naturally, the glamour of Mr. Hercule Poirot comes to the foreground. Now, next character is Colonel Melroach. Colonel Melroach is a local Colonel Melroach is initially reluctant to believe in Ralph Patton's guilt. He is also man from police station. He is fond of Ralph and unwilling to consider the possibility that Ralph could be the murderer. Colonel Melroach does not believe that Ralph Patton can be the murderer. Okay? Now, however, as the evidence against Ralph mounts, he hesitatingly begins to be convinced that Ralph Patton is the killer. He is also a fool. He is also good for nothing in the case. Next character is Mr. Hammond. Roger Ackroyd and his Mrs. Ferrar's lawyer. Mr. Hammond is a small, dried-up man who Dr. Shepard described as having lawyer written all over him. He is bantered here. His top to bottom is lawyer. However, he does willingly provide Poirot with some key details about the terms of Ackroyd's will as well as the money Mrs. Ferrars was paying her blackmailer. Being a man from law, he knows everything related to the will of Mr. Roger Ackroyd and the money Mrs. Ferrars had to pay before her committing suicide. Next character is Elsie Dell, the housemaid. Elsie Dell is a simple, straightforward girl and quickly dismissed by Poirot as a potential suspect. She just asked to appear, superficially interrogated and forsaken. So she is not so important character, Elsie Dell. Next character is Miss Gannett. Miss Gannett, these are all minor characters. Miss Gannett, a good friend of Colonel Shepherd, Caroline Shepherd. Miss Gannett is like Caroline, a busybody, town gossip who adores speculating with Caroline about the crime. Just she is peripheral character. Next character is Colonel Carter. Colonel Carter, a friend of Caroline and Dr. Shepherd, is related to all of them. Colonel Carter is a somewhat pompous man who likes to exaggerate the details of his exotic and impressive past. He is not important in the case. Next character is Mrs. Folliot. Ursula Burns' sister, Mrs. Folliot, pretends to be her former employer in order to help Ursula get a job. A kind woman, unused to lying, she becomes incredibly uncomfortable when Dr. Shepherd asks her about Ursula. So, these are some of the characters involved in the novel. The most important characters are Roger Ackroyd, Mrs. Ferrars, Dr. James Shepherd, Cecil Ackroyd, Flora Ackroyd, Charles Kent. This is how the characters play their significant role, and we get a clear idea of the plot of the story by observing the roles and functions of the characters involved in the novel. So, thank you very much.